Imagine it's a quiet evening. You're relaxing at home after a long day, and everything is peaceful. Until suddenly, there's a loud knock on your door. Not the friendly, "Hey, could I borrow some sugar?" kind of knock. This one feels urgent, maybe even hostile. And then the shouting begins. This is where our story starts. Susan Lorincz, a 58-year-old woman living in Ocala, Florida, found herself in a tense situation. Standing in her kitchen, minding her own business, or so she thought, when the banging on her door began. Her heart races. Her mind races. What would you do in this situation? Some of us might peek through the blinds and pretend we're not home. You know, the classic "maybe if I stay really quiet, they'll just go away" move. But Susan had other ideas. On the other side of the door was 35-year-old AJ Owens, known to her friends and family as AJ. She was there to confront Susan about an incident that involved her children. What started as a confrontation about a lost iPad soon escalated into a deadly encounter. Susan, feeling threatened, grabbed her gun. In her fear and panic, she fired a shot through her front door. Tragically, that shot struck AJ Owens, ending her life. Was this self-defense or a horrific overreaction? To understand what led to this tragic event, we need to rewind a bit. Susan and AJ had a history, a rocky one. AJ's children often played outside near Susan's home, and there were ongoing disputes between the two women. Neighbors report that Susan frequently complained about the children, even throwing racial slurs their way. The day of the shooting, tensions reached a boiling point. AJ's children had been playing outside when an argument broke out. According to reports, Susan allegedly threw an iPad at one of the kids. Furious, AJ went to confront her. But Susan tells a different story. In her mind, AJ was a threat, someone who could hurt her. And that fear, justified or not, led to her pulling the trigger.
And now to our big story at 5:30. New video tonight. The Marion County Sheriff's Office has released hours of body cam video showing deputies responding to calls at the home of Susan Lorincz. She is the woman accused of shooting and killing her neighbor last month.
AJ Owens was shot through the door while knocking on Lorintz's door. And as the body camera video shows us, Lorincz was no stranger to calling 911.
And what about her said that she's going to come and drag my and beat me? When I started calling you because she wouldn't get out of my face, she just kept standing in front of me. I don't understand the attitude and stuff. You know, she runs over there. Why do her children have to be over here screaming?
Now, Susan Lorincz faces charges for manslaughter with a firearm, as well as additional charges related to the shooting. Her defense? She claims she was acting in self-defense. But the community sees it differently. AJ's family and friends describe her as a loving mother who was simply standing up for her children. To understand the legal implications, let's dive deeper into Florida's controversial Stand Your Ground law. You may remember this law from the high-profile case of George Zimmerman, who shot and killed Trayvon Martin in 2012. Like Zimmerman, Susan Lorincz claimed she feared for her life and was defending herself. Florida's Stand Your Ground law allows individuals to use deadly force if they believe they are in imminent danger of serious bodily harm. Unlike traditional self-defense laws, there is no duty to retreat before using force. This means that, legally, Susan wasn't required to try to avoid the confrontation before firing her gun. But AJ's family argues that Susan's actions were far from reasonable. To them, this was a case of reckless aggression fueled by racial tension. Race and fear, a volatile mix that has led to countless tragedies in America. But where does the truth lie in this case? Was this a matter of self-defense, or was it a preventable act of violence? Let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. This wasn't the first time tensions had flared between Susan and AJ. Neighbors describe a pattern of hostility. Susan often complained about the noise from AJ's children playing near her property. And AJ? She was fiercely protective of her kids, especially in the face of what she perceived as racial discrimination. It seems that what began as small disagreements escalated over time into something much more dangerous. And in the end, it was this dangerous mix of fear, anger, and misunderstanding that led to the tragic death of AJ Owens. The police arrived quickly after the shooting. Susan Lorincz was arrested on the spot and charged with manslaughter. But for AJ's family, this was only the beginning of their fight for justice.
On a call from August 10th of last year, Lorincz met with a deputy outside of her home. She said kids were playing in an open field near her residence, which you can see on camera. Lorincz claimed she had bad migraines and the kids screaming and yelling was causing her harm. Lorincz also mentioned she was doing dissertation work and needed to concentrate. Her big ask was respect.
About them playing out here. Why are they on private property that they have no means? I mean, they don't rent here.
Well, if those people aren't complaining, I can't kick them off that property.
Well, then I'll send the cease and desist letter to them. I'll have my lawyer do it.
Well, I mean, as long as they're not on your property, I mean, they can pretty much play wherever they want to play.
I don't want to be intimidated by them screaming and yelling at me, telling me I'm a calling me Karen. They're calling me names.
AJ's death has sparked outrage in the community, with many calling for harsher charges against Susan Lorincz.
We don't feel like AJ's been given equal protection.
In a virtual news conference Tuesday, attorneys and spokespersons for AJ Owens' family expressed disappointment.
This does not feel like justice. This is not what the state attorney led us to believe over the past couple of weeks.
Despite calls to upgrade a manslaughter charge to second-degree murder for Susan Lorincz, the state attorney in Marion County decided against it.
They believe this was more than just manslaughter. It was murder. But the legal system is rarely that simple. Susan Lorincz faces up to 30 years in prison if convicted of manslaughter with a firearm. But what will the jury decide? That will depend on how they interpret her fear, her actions, and the law itself. As the trial unfolds, the community watches closely, waiting to see whether justice will be served. But no matter the outcome, one thing is clear: 2 lives have been shattered by this senseless act of violence. After the tragic shooting of AJ Owens, the legal process began, and all eyes were on the courtroom. Susan Lorincz now faced a trial that would determine her fate. Would the jury see this as a clear case of manslaughter, or would they sympathize with her claims of self-defense? Florida stand your ground. Law loomed large over the proceedings, and both the prosecution and defense were ready to battle it out. The prosecution aimed to paint a picture of reckless violence, an act that was neither necessary nor justified. Meanwhile, the defense would focus on fear, Susan's fear that she was in imminent danger, and acted to protect herself. The trial would hinge on the interpretation of these events, whether Susan's fear was reasonable, and whether her actions were justified under the law. To build their case, both sides called witnesses to the stand, including neighbors who witnessed the events and experts who could provide insight into the stand your ground defense. Witnesses testified that while AJ was visibly upset during the confrontation, there was no indication that she intended to cause harm. The prosecution used these testimonies to argue that Susan's perception of danger was exaggerated and that she acted rashly. The prosecution emphasized that AJ had no weapon, that she was on the other side of a locked door, and that Susan could have chosen a nonviolent response. But the defense pushed back, arguing that Susan's actions were driven by fear, a fear that, under Florida law, could justify her use of deadly force. Throughout the trial, the defense sought to humanize Susan, painting her as a woman who, in the heat of the moment, made a tragic mistake.
She told cops she was acting in self-defense and didn't intend to kill anyone.
Was your goal to shoot and kill her?
No,
What was your goal?
to shoot and hopefully, she'd hear the shot and dissipate.
In a dramatic moment in the trial, the front door with a bullet hole was brought into court. The victim's mom spoke out after the verdict.
My heart is a little lighter, and we're now on the path of true healing.
Lorincz was ordered jailed to await sentencing. The judge had these final words for her.
Thank you and good luck to you.
The defendant faces a maximum of 30 years in prison when she is sentenced.
But one rooted in fear rather than malice. Susan herself took the stand, tearfully recounting the events of that night. She described the pounding on the door, the shouting, and the overwhelming fear that drove her to reach for her gun. But the prosecution pressed hard, pointing out inconsistencies in Susan's story and questioning whether her fear was truly justified. It was a tense moment in the courtroom as Susan struggled to answer. The prosecution argued that her failure to call the authorities before using deadly force indicated that her actions were not those of someone in immediate danger. As the trial continued, the community remained divided. Some supported Susan, believing that she was acting in self-defense, while others stood firmly with AJ's family, demanding justice for her senseless death. The jury was left with a difficult decision. Was Susan Lorincz justified in her actions? Or did she take an innocent life in a moment of panic? After days of deliberation, they returned with their verdict. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the jury announced their decision.
I'll get that one back. Ms. Lawrence, the jury has found you guilty of manslaughter with a firearm. You're going to be adjudicated guilty of that offense. I assume that sentencing will be at a later date, is that correct?
That's correct, Judge.
Are you requesting a pre-sentence investigation?
Yes, sir.
What I'm going to do is have the Department of Corrections prepare a pre-sentence investigation. I'll continue this case. I'll put it all the way to November docket, although I expect us to be sentenced long before that. I'm just putting us far enough away to get everything done. So when we get the PSI done, then please contact my office. We'll set a sentencing. Ms. Lawrence, you're going to be held in custody of the Marion County Jail without bond until that time, okay? Thank you and good luck to you.
Thank you, Judge. May we be excused?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Susan Lorincz was found guilty of manslaughter with a firearm, a conviction that could carry up to 30 years in prison. The verdict brought a sense of closure for AJ's family, but it was a bittersweet victory. Nothing could bring AJ back, and her children would have to grow up without their mother. Yet, for many, the conviction represented accountability and acknowledgement that Susan's actions had crossed a line and that she would face the consequences. The trial of Susan Lorincz may be over, but the conversations it sparked continue. The case has reignited debates over Florida's Stand Your Ground law, the role of fear in justifying violence, and the impact of racial tensions in such cases. As the community seeks healing, the larger question remains: how can we prevent another tragedy like this?